Hello everyone. Today we will talk about magic, reality, illusion, fantasy, dream and American dream concepts and how they included in Woody Allen's short story The Kugelmas episode. Before starting, I want to make some definitions of these words and explain how they are related to literature. And after, I will try to give some examples about them. I hope you enjoy it. And here we go. Our first concept is magic. Actually, all the people in the planet are familiar with the magic from TV shows, magicians, or books. Still, if we need a formal definition of magic, we can say magic is the power of apparently influencing events by using mysterious or supernatural forces. So, what can we say about magic in literature? As I said just before, we are familiar with magic from books. It can be used for expand the story, increase the reading pleasure. It is mostly used in fantasy books, but there can be realistic features and magic in the same story, and we call it magical realism. And the magical realism is a literary movement that blends realistic events with elements of the supernatural. Kafka's Metamorphosis and Marquis, a very old man with enormous wings, are the examples of magical realism. Our second concept is reality. Reality is the sum or aggregate of all that is real or existent within a system, as opposed to that which is only imaginary. The term is also used to refer to the ontological status of things, indicating their existence. In physical terms, reality is the totality of a system, known and unknown. In shortly, we can say reality is the life we live. And of course, as we all can guess, reality has so much influence in literature. In literature, reality appears as realism, and realism is a literary technique and movement that revolutionizes literature. Literary realism creates the appearance of life as it is actually experienced, with characters that speak everyday language and are representative of everyday life as a reader would understand it. And there is two examples for realism in literature: The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, House of Mirth. And also, I have a video about realism technique in my channel. You can watch it too if you want to get more information about realism. Illusion, a misrepresentation of a real sensory stimulus, that is, an interpretation that contradicts objective reality as defined by general agreement. For example, a child who perceives tree branches at night as if they are goblins may be said to be having an illusion. An illusion is a false illustration of something, a deceptive impression, or a false belief. Literally speaking, an illusion is something that is false and not factual. It tricks the human brain into thinking unreal into a real. In other words, it is meant to mislead the perception of readers and deceive their senses. Writers deceive readers' sense of sight, touch, taste, and sounds, making them imagine what is happening by illustrating certain details. In these lines from this monologue, Puck alludes to a contrast between reality, the real world, and illusion, theater. He offers commentary on the theater as a fantasy and dream, where sometimes real-life events become dreams and fantasy. Fantasy is a form of literary genre in which a plot cannot occur in the real world. Its plot usually involves witchcraft or magic taking place on an undiscovered planet of an unknown world. Its overall theme and setting involve a combination of technology, architecture, and language, which sometimes resemble European medieval ages. The most interesting thing about fantasies is that their plot involves witches, sorcerers, mythical and animal creatures talking like humans, and other things that never happen in real life. Fantasy literature is literature set in an imaginary universe, often, but not always without any locations, events, or people from the real world. Magic, the supernatural and magical creatures are common in many of these imaginary worlds. Fantasy literature may be directed at both children and adults. Fantasy is a subgenre of speculative fiction and is distinguished from the genres of science fiction and horror by the absence of scientific or macabre themes, respectively, though these genres overlap. Historically, most works of fantasy were written, however, since the 1960s. A growing segment of fantasy genre has taken the form of films, television programs, graphic novels, video games, music, and art. And there are two examples of fantasy fiction: Alice in Wonderland and The Lord of the Rings. We all dream in our daily lives for the things we want for future. And there is a term, American Dream, the most famous propaganda of the USA. American Dream is the ideal by which equality of opportunity is available to any American, allowing the highest aspirations and goals to be achieved. We can see dreams in literature a lot. It does not need a specific example, I guess, so I am speaking to our main subject. Let's examine how these concepts are used in Kugelmann's episode. In the Kugelmann's episode, Kugelmann is a typical guy who is bored with his life and looking for adventure and affection. The elements of realism in the story include his visit with his therapist, his interactions with his wife, and his responses to the various situations in which he finds himself. Although the literary characters discussed in the story are fictional, the books themselves are real. However, the story becomes magical realism when the magician enters the storyline with his magical box. The idea of a character traveling into various literary settings to meet fictional characters ensures this story fits into the magical realism genre. In the story, Kugelmas is bored and seeks a release from his dull, humdrum existence. He wants to escape from the reality of his oaf-like wife, Daphne, and have an affair. He doesn't want an ordinary dalliance, a chippy on the side as his wife says, but excitement, softness, glamour. He wants to exchange joy glances over red wine and candlelight. He turns to Persky to help him, and even though it should be apparent that things will probably not work out, he willingly suspends his disbelief and hopes for the best. As a sign of his desperation to escape his reality, Kugelmas, the distrusting cityman, accepts that Pushkin knows what he is doing. His fantasy comes to life when he is thrust into the world of Flaubert's novel and begins his affair with Emma Bovary. But Kugelmas soon finds that living with one's fantasy poses many hazards. Once again, Kugelmas wants to escape, this time his fantasy turned reality, either by committing suicide or running away to Europe. He is relieved when Emma is finally transported back to Yonville. Art in the story is an escape from real life, with its fat and dull people and mundane situations. But, even though it's a tempting escape, it is still an illusion, and illusions, by definition, are not all they seem to be. A recurring theme in Allen's fiction and films is the line between art and life, between fantasy and reality. Fantasy in the story is seen on two levels. On the one hand, there are straightforward fantasies, for example, Kugelma's wish to have a beautiful woman by his side, and Emma Bovary's desire for an acting career and fame. But Allen plays on that idea and Kugelma's fantasy become literally a fantastic journey into another dimension. This quote means that Kugelman's fantasy of the greatness of his illusionary options for escape from mundane life, though they look as appealing as a light-hearted picnic in a meadow, are the same as nothingness. They don't exist because they fall through the hole of poor reasoning and fantasy escapism. According to Woody Allen's reasoning as presented within the Kugelmas episode, Kugelmas does deserve his fate in the end. Allen demonstrates that fantasy escapism exploits and traps those involved in it. It trapped Persky in a heart attack and consuming fire, and it trapped Kugelmas in a remedial Spanish-language textbook. Allen also demonstrates that escapism can have unpredictable consequences such as those that occur when Emma comes to New York and such as the incomprehensible alterations to reality and people's perception of reality that occur as seen in the college texts of Madame Bovary. And the American dream is kinda summarized in the story. They do a lot of things with Emma in our real world. And as I said before, American Dream gives equal opportunity to everyone and Kugelmas used it correctly in the past. Kugelmas is a professor and he have money. He shows Emma the real America, but after some time Emma got bored because of watching television all day. She wanted to work or go to a class. Maybe she wanted to live her own dream. Who knows? And this is all. I hope everything is alright in this difficult process that we are living through. Have a nice day. Thanks for listening.